Jorge Pardo employs architecture, design, sculpture, and painting to create works of art that challenge the established definitions and boundaries of these varied disciplines. While much of his works range from a functional redwood pier he created for sculpture project Münster in Germany to the redesign of Dia Chelsea's first floor in New York. Pardo's most famous work is 4166 Seaview Lane from 1998, a project commissioned by MoCA, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, in which the artist turned a Mount Washington home into a work of art. As part of the project, Pardo installed 110 hand-blown glass lights that were borrowed from the Museum Boijmans van Beuningen in Rotterdam, and this was for the public tour portion of the project. Please come on in and sit down. I'd rather you come and sit down during my introduction than during Jorge's talk. Pardo's current project is Techo, a sprawling series of buildings on a 740-acre parcel in the northern Yucatan jungle, where he currently lives and works. Through sustained engagement over the past 6 years, Pardo has combined, quote, Mayan culture and modern design, local craftsmanship and computer-generated technology, natural landscapes, and fantastical interiors to produce a suite of kaleidoscopic experiences, end quote. By ignoring long-established protocols of the museum exhibition, Pardo has become known for merging life with art. This often means merging art with function, which is reflected in his work that's been produced over these many years. A little bit about Jorge's background. Pardo received a BFA from Art Center College of Design in 1988. He was awarded a MacArthur Fellowship in 2010. His works have been presented in solo exhibitions at numerous national and international venues, including the Irish Museum of Modern Art in Dublin, K21 in Dusseldorf, the Dia Art Foundation in New York, Kunsthalle Basel, the Museum of Contemporary Art Los Angeles, and many, many others. So thank you, and please help me in welcoming Jorge Pardo.
Great, thank you, Julie, for introducing me and inviting me and selecting the work for the collection. I thank everybody else at the museum. It's nice to be here. Thank you all for coming. Let's see. I lived in Southern California for almost 30 years. Don't say anything. About a year ago, I moved to Mexico. It wasn't sort of as brash as it sounds like. Sort of been migrating to Mexico for the last 10 years. One of the reasons being one of the projects that Julie described. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Great.
I think no.
No, that was a no? Okay. Am I on? Is this any good?
Yeah.
So everybody can hear me?
No. Yeah.
I can see this and no. Okay, so there we go.
Oh, that's good.
That's a little better. Okay. All right. So yeah, I'm just going to go through a series of things and then maybe end with Techo, the project that you mentioned. And let's see, I'm 51 years old. I was originally born in Cuba, and I'm an American immigrant. I was 6 when I left, and 1969, and I grew up in Chicago. Sort of basically in a funny Cuban enclave of people who wanted to kill Castro. So oddly enough, I think the more interesting ones of us took the opposite route. I also want to kill Castro, but I don't think Cuba's that bad. Anyway, and then I moved to California in '83, and then started school in '84, and was here for 3 years, so I know sound about a little bit. So anyway, so let's start. All right. I always start my lecture sometimes with this work, which is basically it's a work I did when I was in school. It was kind of the first work where I would say it helped me sort of understand what I was sort of interested in terms of kind of inquiries that I was sort of engaged in the years to come. In a sense, and it's a little bit difficult to explain, but I'll try. I'm going to turn my phone on. This is a pinhole camera that is. The pinhole camera is the cup, and it's just a very simple thing. It's a styrofoam cup that I got from the cafeteria at Art Center, and then I kind of took some black tape and made it like a light-proof cavity, and then I stuck a pinhole in it, and I stuck some film in it, and I put it in the bathroom to take a picture of itself. But I didn't just put it in the bathroom, I put it in front of the mirror in the bathroom. So there's a whole series of works like this that I did that they were just kind of objects that wanted to sort of be cameras, but that they also wanted to do the things they were. They had a very simple function, which is they took pictures of themselves, so they would have to be kind of married to some reflective surface in terms of their image production. They were like something they put mirrors, and some of them put reflective surfaces. So, this particular photograph, what's probably the most interesting about it is, or at least to me anyway, is that the image that the cup took of itself in the space was, since it was in the men's room, there's some urinals in the back, and the exposure was about 6 minutes, and during that exposure, about 4 or 5 guys peed. But the exposure is so slow that you don't really see it. So, and that's probably one of the most interesting things that this project did, is that it didn't just, like in a simplistic way, sort of, divided and kind of rendered explicit like this problem of the subject and the object in the photograph, and the producer and the machine. And what it did is that it actually kind of produced this kind of other space, which is that it's basically saying, like, you can sort of set up these kind of very pragmatic kind of scenarios for kind of testing the limits of how much an artist can or can't control an image. But at the end of the day, the thing that's kind of most impacting about this project here is the image and what's not in the image. And so it's like the thing that these projects did best is that they kind of made their own form of duration. They shaped the time that it took for them to sort of make themselves into images. So and that's complicated, because you're talking about. You're not talking about objects anymore, you're talking about the quality of things, and the quality of time, and the quality of experiences and things like that. And those are the things I'm interested in, among many other things. So it's the work always takes a very simple proposition, and it kind of tries to kind of have it do something else. And this is another couple photographs, and this is a 2x4 table that got taken apart, and all these are images of the parts of the table. And this is the same process, but it's very abstract. And this is a kind of a closer image of the photograph that you're looking at earlier. This is a show that I did in 1990. It's kind of my first exhibition, my first, I would say, professional exhibition. As retarded as that sounds. Now that everybody wants to be a professional artist, I mean, it's kind of insulting to think that when I was a kid. It probably still is. It's, but anyway, this is a gallery called Tom Solomon's Garage, and when I was in school, Tom wanted to show the photographs, and then I said, Tom, I don't want to show those things because that project was really kind of a project that emerged and evolved out of kind of an academic culture. And one of the things that I wanted to do, I mean, I enjoyed being a student, I enjoyed making work. There's works that I made that I still find useful and all those things, but I think it's kind of, when you make works in school, it's like a bubble. You know, and it's like, and most people, like, you know, 99.999% of everybody who makes work at school is never going to make work in the future. And that's just the reality of the thing. So I said, you know, I've been in school for 4 years. I kind of was doing that, but I don't want to make this work because, I want to show this work because I don't really know I don't know how to think about it in terms of construction. I want to sort of go out in the world and kind of work for a bit and see if I still want to be an artist or not. Because that's always been a kind of a fundamental question for me. Like, how do you, what is it? Like, I'm not somebody who's obsessed with drawing or making things necessarily with my hands. I mean, I used to make a lot of things with my hand. I kind of became a decent carpenter at one point and learned, a little bit about drawing and painting at Art Center. It was horrible, but I was never really interested in that so much. I was never interested in craft. I was always interested more in like how, being an artist allows you to really kind of like put these very kind of eccentric conditions at play, and how useless propositions could be as an artist, or like how things don't have to add up to anything, and kind of and I'm 51, so I grew up in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s as a kid, and that was fun because you didn't really like your parents back then. Now everybody loves their parents. They're horrible people. Maybe they weren't. It was kind of a trendy thing, but it's sort of, everybody who was in art school ended up in art school because they kind of didn't want to be how everybody else was to some degree. I mean, some people were more conservative and they actually thought they had skill, but those people were never taken seriously. So anyway, so this is a work that not a work but a show that I did. It was basically just what I did for the 2 years after I left school. This show is actually from 90. It says 91, but it's actually 1990. I graduated in 88. So I kind of learned to make things with my hands again. I mean, I always made things with my hand, but I learned to make things really well with my hands. So I spent a couple of years learning how to be a carpenter, and I just started to make things. I don't know if there's no more. Well, this is kind of wasn't in the show, but it's sort of like I'll go back. The show had like this kind of little splicer, like a Super 8mm splicer. It's called an Urbic splicer. They're probably still around. People probably still make 8mm films, but not so much anymore, I would imagine. And then there was a coffee maker, like an Italian coffee maker next to it, as you can see, and a pallet, shipping pallet, a 2x4, and a ladder. And all of those things I made, just to different degrees. Like the 2x4 I made completely. The ladder I had just a couple legs to, and changed all the screws on them, and kind of got fancier screws. And the pallet I found out in front of my house, and it was kind of disheveled, so I made kind of new pieces of wood for it, and then like refinished it. And what I was trying to do was trying to understand, like, what is it about these objects that if you interact with them, how does that interaction, what's the quality of the reflexiveness that you can produce in objects by doing different things to it? Reflexivity is for me is probably the only thing that's really valuable that art makes. I think artists make mirrors, And interesting artists make really strange mirrors and really kind of, succinct, and they look at things that are really hard to see, or even find sometimes. So what I was trying to do is I was trying to sort of like see if there was a kind of way that you could go from like doing an activity to like actually slightly changing the nature of something because of how it's produced or how it was remade, or what material changes there were, or not so much context, but well, yeah, context, but it wasn't so important. I mean, it was like the whole Deschampian problem was already very old at that point. It wasn't really about you could put anything in the gallery. That the problem of it not being a painting or sculpture wasn't really a big deal anymore, and it's even less of a big deal now. So, but I was interested in like how you can kind of interact with things, and things. The word "things" are very important. It is very important because it's not making things. It's kind of interacting with things, and how do you actually kind of find a way to like make the making reflexive? And how does somebody read stupid gestures that aren't normally art gestures? They weren't like painting, they weren't sculpting, they were like, oh, I want you to look at this bolt that I changed that used to be a different bolt. You may not even care, you may not even know, but somehow for the work that, like the ladder that was changed, it was like, that became the organizing principle about why it was made. And those are the kind of things I wanted to sort of look at. I wanted to consider, I wanted to see if they could, what type of visualities these kinds of gestures would produce. And they didn't do much. They basically didn't do much. It was like, these are very popular works, they all got sold and blah, blah, blah. But in terms of like, at the end of the day, they were just objects. They were things that, you would consume because you thought they were interesting or whatever, you fetishized them or something like that. But they're works that were really useful to me, but they're not, I wouldn't say, they're works that I like more for nostalgic reasons than probably anything else. This is an interesting work that was sort of from that same group, that same period. So it's an old counter from the Bank of America from the 80s. And I did this group of works where I went to Bank of America and I just measured the counters and kind of remade them. And I kind of went to the bank and I thought, okay, what's the thing you're not supposed to do here? You're not supposed to steal shit, basically. Right? It's like, well, what can you steal here? Or what can you take? What can you take where there isn't some sort of moral implication as a product of that painting? So I would just go to I went to 3 of them. I just go to the bank and I'd start measuring the counter and kind of making drawings. And the security guard would get they'd get aggressive and say like, well, I'm an artist, I'm making work, I want to duplicate this, so I want to measure it. I have an account here. And they would leave me alone. And then I made a group of these, and then I basically changed some of the terms, and then what I did is I made them in different sizes. I made them in like full scale, half scale, and quarter scale. And there's only one photograph for all of them because they look kind of the same. So it's like so there was only one slide for all 3 of them. So in terms of the documentation process, it didn't really matter. So it's a kind of a peculiar work that's really eccentric and narcissistic, and it was a lot of fun to make. This is another work that's sort of from that period also, for that group of work, which is that the top part is this sort of like this Mondrian thing. I was making a spice rack for my mom, so I made another one and I had it laying around and I painted it, and then I put it on top of this funny looking thing on the bottom, which is it's a sample from Home Depot for adhesives, for an adhesive basically. So it just shows you what this adhesive can stick together. When you go buy the adhesive or anything, and sometimes we'll have like a sample of how you can use it or something like that. Well, that thing is just laying there. It's kind of a cool thing. I'm just going to take it, see if they they don't. And I just took it and I just put it on the counter and then it was like I had it in my hand and I just walked out with it. Because it didn't really have any value there. I thought, this is an interesting thing. This is an object that sort of resides in a place where all there is selling and it's worthless. And it's like, so then I just use it as a base. I just use it as a base and I stuck it in there and it's very simple. So, this I'm not going to go into because half of the piece that's important is missing. This is an old show. This is kind of interesting. This is a gallery. The gallery that I showed in Berlin in '94, I think it was the show. I designed the gallery. That was the exhibition. It was, we opened the gallery. My dealers opened the gallery with me as the first show. And my show was to make the gallery. And there wasn't anything to sell except everything I'd done. So like, at the end we decided like, well, let's try to sell those little lights that are in the thing. It's like, oh, we should put something on the wall. So I went and took some pictures of some nice places, and then I put the pictures on the wall, and then I took the pictures and I used them as titles. So nothing in the show had any titles. It was a mess because nobody knew how to archive anything or how to actually keep track of it. So it was like, but if you bought like a lamp, you got a picture with it, but it wasn't a picture you couldn't hang it. It was actually a title. So it was ridiculous. But a lot of things. So anyway, and the identity of the gallery is still used. And this is 20 years ago. So this is a little book, stand or whatever, credenza thing. That was work that you could sell. These are the titles. And then this was one of the lamps in the desk. I found this in Santa Barbara. It used to be great the thrift shop here in the old days. This is a group of lamps that I made. That was the show. This is not part of the show. This is a group of lamps that I did at the show in Gisela Capitan. And I made a lot of lamps, and this is probably one of the first lamps that we made in the lab. Gold. I always fluctuate between I and we because I have about 8 or 9, 10 people working with me all the time in the studio, and it really depends. I think it's kind of interesting I don't necessarily think it's realistic to say you collaborate with people because you're an artist, and at the end of the day, everything that comes out of the studio is. And I'm not a hippie artist, I'm not somebody who like goes around and hey, let's do this together. It's like, oh, I want to do this. Can you help me? That's kind of how it works, It's like, and but it's kind of an interesting, but I go back and forth because I think that there are a lot of things that do happen through collaboration in the studio, but very simple, straight everyday collaboration. Everything from like I was thinking about some screws that these would be interesting for that, and I don't like those, but it's a kind of a peculiar thing. I hate this discourse of authenticity and authorship and all. I think it's a bunch of bullshit. I think the art world is basically it's full of narcissists at the end of the day who don't know how to divide labor. And it's, at the end of the day, it's like I don't do interns or any of that stuff because it's disturbing to have people work for free in your studio, and they also take a lot of work to actually train and stuff, so they're kind of useless. And but anyway, this is not to digress. This is a boat we made for the World Festival Hall, and it's basically, I wanted to make a boat. I just learned to sail, and I was just trying to figure out how to kind of install it in an interesting way. This is an image of 41 Cedar Lane when the exhibition was up. Julie sort of touched on the exhibition a bit. In 1993, MoCA invited me to do an exhibition at the museum. It was Ann Goldstein, who actually was the curator there, and she offered me an exhibition at MoCA, and it was in the Focus Gallery. It was called a Focus Show, and for those of you who may or may not know, in the early 90s, late 80s, museums, like everything else in this country, wanted to kind of divest themselves of any real, encyclopedic, urgency in terms of collecting and things like that. So there were these kind of spaces that all these museums had that were either called focus, or they were basically galleries where you could do shows and you wouldn't necessarily be obliged to collect any of the things you showed. Because in the past, like in the 80s, when a museum would sort of, you do a one-person show, it usually meant that you would be embedded into that collection, and it was a big deal. Where now museums became more like, I don't know, they became more like schools or something like that, where it's like there was a kind of, they were after kind of an agility for programming and whatever, every other aspect of museology. So anyway, so when she asked me to do the exhibition, I looked at the gallery. The gallery was kind of small. I thought, and it's kind of weird. And I thought, I want to be in the museum. I don't want to be in a small gallery, even though I'm a young artist. And But what's interesting, that impulse was real. It was kind of a creepy impulse on my part. But I thought, this is interesting because it's real. It's like, so if I wanted to scale something up, how could I do it? And at the same time, not necessarily be in one of the bigger galleries, but actually kind of open that problem up to something that was bigger that meant, like, not just my impulse to have a larger show, but actually, like, how big of a show could a museum do? Like, can a museum manage something that's not in the space? Can it actually kind of like how will it stay a show if it's actually somewhere else? And will it stay a show if it actually isn't just somewhere else, but actually inhabits a kind of a quotidian space, like a neighborhood, and an impulse like wanting to own your home or build your home or something like that. How would an exhibition reside in that type of a proposition, in that type of space? And it became interesting to me because I said, Dan, look, I don't want to do a show in the space. It's kind of a shitty space and it's weird. And I don't like that you guys have these rules for not collecting things. Not that we have to collect anything we want, but I think it's weird. And I think from that, what I want to do is I want to make a house. And it's like, what do you mean make a house? It's, well, I want to make a house. I want to make a house and put it in the museum. I don't want to make a house and take a picture of it. I want to make a house. And I want that to be what the show is. And I want the tendrils of the museum to be connected to that. And I want that to make real problems for how you kind of administrate and make visible and support or not support or see it, really. What gets lost? What gets, what's left? What ends up, what's the visuality of a gesture like that? Which is what I was trying to understand. And it seemed like this sort of problem of visuality within a gesture like that was interesting to me because it was always dispersing itself. It wasn't like when you make a painting, it's like everything is about concentration. To the degree that even today, paintings are all, whether you want to believe it or not, I think people are still a bunch of formalists. Greenberg had it right. It's like, it's all about delimiting flatness. It's like, you want to make a painting, it has to be about the fact that there's a freaking little box with canvas on the wall. And it's all about the potentiality of that and opening that potentiality up. I have no interest in that. I'm interested in how an activity can become an object, or how an object can refer to an activity, and how you can sort of confuse those things, how you can actually kind of turn an experience into something that's not, how experiences that are similar are not, and vice versa, and how could MoCA really kind of, what would it mean to have a docent up at this house that was kind of embedded inside all these kind of conflicts of interest and kind of weird, creepy impulses from, Anyway, so when I proposed the show, Anne sort of proposed it, and she had a really hard time because the people the board at the time said, we don't want to fund this because it wasn't very much money. They had to have like $30,000 or $40,000 for the show, but we don't want to fund it because we don't want an artist to take the money from the sculpture department and build themselves a house. And I said, well, you just did a Robert Gober show. You probably spent $500,000, and it's all in the garbage can right now. And I saw the container out there. And it's like, what's the problem? So it's interesting what, when the shit hits the fan, what really means what to people, and how different and dispersed that is for everybody, and what constitutes sort of authenticity and things like that. And so anyway, Anne Goldstein is a very good curator. She was a very nice person, and she kept sort of coming back with the exhibition. And finally, it sort of happened like 5 or 6 years later. And at that time, I sort of raised so much money. I made the house, and the show was I think the show was up for about 6 or 8 weeks, and we had about between 5,000 and 6,000 people who came. And it was open Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and it was pretty neat because it was on the day it opened, it was reviewed by Christopher Knight, which is the kind of hotshot from the LA Times, and then a week later it was reviewed by Nicholas Orsoff, this creepy little guy in the architecture department at LACMA, and he went to the New York Times. But anyway, and it was sort of like there were kind of different problems that were really kind of made explicit about how the work was received by these two different professional practices. Like Christopher Knight talked about old work, and he sort of made this. He kind of made this construction of how the work was sort of was making sense in relationships, how the other works had sort of evolved and things like that, and how it works. But then Nicholas Orsoff said, it's not real architecture. It's because it's not doing this, it's not doing that. But he did Orsoff did a really amazing job at describing the spaces. Like you really get when you read his review, you realize that this person's really an expert at putting into words what these rooms are like, what their shapes are like, and things like that. Whereas for Christopher Knight, that really wasn't even a consideration. I mean, you had somebody who's coming from the art world whose primary mode, whose organizing principle for writing is a kind of something on more of a symbolic order. And then you have somebody who's in the architectural field who's really not. It's more about like proportions of space and professional legitimacy. Like for instance, like architects are really. It's important to be in the AIA or whatever. It's important. I mean, it's like there's certain things that there are kind of foundations. I mean, architecture is very conservative. It's a highly functioning conservative American European tradition. You have to be licensed. You have to. You can't just put stuff up in the city or you'll get sued. I mean, so it's funny because I about a couple of years ago I did a class at Princeton where I did an architecture studio, graduate studio, and it was really kind of interesting because when we would do the crits, and I did it with a couple of other professors who were architects, and the mode of address was so different because you would, like a student would propose something or have something up, and it's like, and one of the architects would say, well, you're not doing that, you're doing this, you're not doing that, and I want it next week, and it's like, okay. And then they'd come back, and the next week they had changed everything, and it was just like, that would never happen in art school. Somebody would start crying, or it would be a shitstorm really fast. It doesn't work. So it's interesting. There are real differences in these fields. They're not just or just because you can make something that looks like it belongs somewhere else doesn't mean it's the same thing. There really exist these kind of differences, and those differences primarily reside in the kind of discursive culture and academic cultures that these different practices embody. So this is a work I did in New York at the DIA. And the DIA but this was a venue they had in Chelsea, Manhattan, on 22nd Street. And it's kind of like, for those of you who may not know the Dia is kind of like it's kind of like I don't know, it's sort of like, it's like the Vatican for minimalist art. You know, it's like where art from the 60s really kind of went home to die in a way. It's sort of like, and it was, you know, it's basically, it's an institution that was started by you know, like really rich Texans, oil people, oil lady, I should say, with her crazy German boyfriend, this guy Heinrich Friedrich. And he basically found this rich lady from Texas whose family had a lot of oil, and they decided that they were going to basically select these artists, 11 of them, and they were going to sponsor them and really kind of think about like how you can make cathedrals in a contemporary way. That was that was the language that they were using. I mean, it was like, how is that possible? Like, how do you set up a kind of a very, very traditional patron-artist relationship in a contemporary situation? I mean, it's hopelessly conservative, you know, if you really think about it. That you have all this work that's like some of the most progressive work that's ever been made, and it's coming from the United States, and it's the first work that really is kind of made by working class people in the United States. It's like, you know, most of the DRs were like in the GI Bill and things like that. I mean, it's like the 60s are a huge, big deal in America. You know, they kind of, it's not, in the art world it's a big deal. I mean, Robert Irwin was in the Army, and all these, there's a reason things change. It's not just because art evolves, because it keeps looking back at itself. It evolves because the way people live changes. You know, what issues form from like the urgency of your own reality, not anything else. You know, it's so I thought it was funny that you know, one of the most progressive and the most pure kind of institutions, or maybe even the most pure institution at the time, had sort of, you know, founded itself in these very, very conservative principles, and in the support of these very, very progressive artists. And there's a kind of an interesting contradiction, you know, and it's kind of screwy, you know. And I was chosen to do something there, and when they ask you, they kind of say, well, you know, we want you to do a show at the DIA, you know, and it's like, we'll give you a floor, and you know, it's like we're going to offer you the ground floor. You can work at the bookstore, you can do what you want, but it's your floor, and every artist will get a floor. And it would change. And you know, the shows would last about a year. They would actually last a year. They would last 9 months. The DIA didn't have air conditioning, so it couldn't really do shows in the summer. They couldn't get loans for a lot of works that they were showing, so they had to wait till the weather got better. So they would install all summer, and then it would be up from September. And I said, sure, I'd like to do the ground floor. That sounds great. And so what I did is I basically said, yeah, what would happen if you take all the kind of spatial tropes and conditions that make you feel the way you feel at the DIA, which is kind of like insane, because you would go into like an abandoned industrial building, and there would be this reverence that happened because of the way the show was installed, because of the middle. I mean, Robert Gluckman did all, you know, there's nothing in your way. And it's like all you have is like post-industrial decay and you know, works that basically refuse to kind of understand their limits. By that I mean that they don't want frames. Works that kind of understand their limits, they need a frame. They say, this stops here. Minimal art doesn't do frames. It basically, it gets put in a white space. The real world for minimalism is whiteness. You know, that's where it sort of resides, and that's where everything sort of happens. And I said, what would happen if you take that away? You know, what would happen to these works, the trajectory of this place, if you actually go in and try to screw with it a bit? And like, so I made a bookstore, and I said, I want the bookstore to be separate. I want the bookstore to be kind of, I'm not going to put a wall between the bookstore. I'm going to glass between the bookstores, so that every time you're in the exhibition space, you're always going to have to look at people shop. And every time you're shopping, you get a glimpse of the exhibition. I think I wanted on a very simple level to say, like, all the spaces here are the same. They are only different because they're different. But there was no way to kind of control that, you know. And I wanted to make a model for that thought, and that model became this architectural gesture. So anyway, and then I think that's it for together. This is a public project I did in Germany at the Bundesrat, which is kind of like the Senate or the or Congress. I don't quite understand the parliamentary system very well, but it's basically a cafeteria for like the senators, and they kind of sit there and eat lunch. These are some drawings that I made. This is an interesting one. This is a work that I named after my cat. His name was Oliver. He just died this summer. And it's basically, I got invited to be in an exhibition at the, it's Robsburg? I don't remember. I've been to so many strange sounding German cities. I was weird. Anyway, but it was a public exhibition. It was a kind of like a sculpture exhibition. And you basically you go around the city and you put stuff down. And what I was interested in, I said I want to make a monument, and because traditionally, like in parks and public spaces, you know, sculptures are monuments. You know, the history of sculpture is the history of really either dead nice people or dead nasty people. It's basically, you know, enshrined in bronze. That's really what the history of sculpture is. You know, it's mortuary practice. It's a mortuary history. It's not anything else. And you got Stonehenge or something. I'm sure a bunch of people died doing that too. So I was interested in making a monument. I was interested in making a monument to something that was alive, and not dead. And so I wanted to make a monument to like how natural and how impossible it is for people not to sit still in front of moving pictures. I wanted to make a monument to watching TV. I wanted to make a monument to watching movies. I wanted to make a monument to like this idea that less than 100 years ago, moving images didn't exist. They were these things that they just didn't exist. They come from zero, really. And you know, the camera comes along, the film industry comes along, and it's the most, you know, it's the most natural thing that I think any of us do in terms of actually consuming media or consuming information or whatever. I mean, reading is getting kind of complicated now. Maybe not for my generation, but I think people are going to read less and less and less, and the reading is going to happen is going to be more and more specific. It's all going to be on computers. So I was interested in thinking about that. So what I did is I basically made a structure that was a movie theater, but it was made out of plexiglass and it was transparent, and it was a mirror. So there were like these two kind of little buildings. They were maybe maybe a little bit bigger than that, and they were just kind of like mirrored into each other. And they each kind of had this little amphitheater like here, smaller, and then you would show movies on inside, and you could see. And this piece would only work at night. So on the weekends, like on Saturdays, there's Oliver in. And it's kind of funny because it did turn into a monument of the dead first thing anyway. Anyway, he had a good life. So what I thought would be interesting is like, you know, how I want to make a thing that is about encapsulating somebody doing something, and that doing of something is looking at moving images. So I just stuck this in the park, and people would, you know, the people who kind of put the exhibition together, I said, you guys can pick whatever films you want to watch. The films are free to show them on the weekends. I just want to have, like, when people walk at night or something like that, that they're looking at people watching films. And the reason it has a kind of a container in it is because of that. It would be very different, for instance, if it was just a kind of a screen in the grass or something like that. I wanted to sort of kind of delimit or frame this thing in a way with a kind of very particular building. So. Everybody just liked the weird looking shape and stuff. Nobody really liked anything else. This is jewelry that I made for an exhibition in Switzerland. Some of it's nice, some of it's not. And it was set up next to this boat. And I wanted to make an exhibition about things that were big and small. So like you enter one room and you see this, and then you enter another room which is tiny and you start to look at jewelry. And I really wanted to, like, you know, and I kind of almost like a caricature level, just have that be the kind of organizing principle, or that was the organizing principle of the exhibition. But again, it's kind of associated with a lot of other set of problems. This is a lamp of me that actually John worked on. And we did a show. We made portraits of everybody in the studio that worked at the studio. And we all got scanned, and then made these funny lamps of everybody. This is a project that I did in Guadalajara. This is a work we did for LACMA. It's basically, LACMA asked me to work with the pre-Columbian collection, which apparently is one of the best pre-Columbian collections, you know, a Western pre-Columbian Mexican in the world, actually. And so we have this stuff. Michael Govan came and asked me, so we have these objects that are kind of really, you know, important, but we've never really kind of found a way to kind of showcase them in a way where actually there's something that, you know, like nobody really. A lot of them are also, they were kind of, I mean, this pre-Columbian stuff is really karmically really compromised. You know, it's like half the stuff stolen and dug up out of the ground in Mexico legally, stuff like that, through a lot of the American vacation people in the '60s. So it's kind of, I kind of saw it as kind of almost it's like witchcraft or voodoo or something. You're basically, you know, one of the world's most important cultures, Mexico, ends up in, you know, some guy's house in Beverly Hills because he went on vacation to Puerto Vallarta or something. It's kind of insane, but anyway. But that's just the kind of, like, I was thinking about the problematic of working with these works. I don't know anything about these works. I'm not an expert. I didn't try to become one in the process. But what I was interested in kind of thinking about them, these objects, and thinking about how they were made. And the idea that you know, how do you kind of work with them as things as opposed to reverential things. You know, like how do you, because generally they're, you know, when you see things like this in a museum, there's usually like a pedestal, and then there's a kind of you end up reading like a didactic, and it's very quiet. The lights are down. There's like, you know, it's like this perpetual eulogy for these freaking things, and it doesn't make a lot of sense because these things are really crafted, and they're actually, you know, they're beautiful things, and they have a lot of color, and somebody made these in a way where they were about intensities that they have, and usually the modes of display they forefront the opposite. You know, and I don't know if it's because it's just the way, you know, crazy white people are. I don't know what, or it's maybe there's a certain guilt in the fact that, like, it's understood, but it's known but not understood, that these things are kind of really displaced in a really ugly way. You know, you go up and dig up people's, you know, tombs and take the stuff and, you know, put them in a parlor. It's pretty fucked up. So it's like, you know, and I'm not sure, you know what I mean? There's all this kind of convolution, you know, things that are convoluted and just the way they feel, or the way they are, and things like that. So I want to do the opposite. I want to say, look, let's make this thing kind of, let's make it so that it actually, like somebody was in there, and the objects are the objects. But I want the space to be a place where, you know, you have to move through it because you are aware of the frame as much as you are aware of these objects, because at the end of the day, there was an artist who made these objects and there's an artist who made this frame. So, and I wanted to sort of make a condition so that we were sort of on the same, you know, like I'm as interested in ornamentation as the people who made these objects were. And that's the point of view that it sort of came from. And it's obviously, you know, thousands of years later, blah, 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 and at the end of the day. But what was interesting that happened is that, you know, I chose the palette for it, and these objects that are normally, when you see them in a kind of a more traditional, you know, neutral sense, they kind of don't have much color, you know, like the materials. But once you start to kind of do that, then you start to play with complements, and you start to play with kind of like, you know, different, you start to kind of realize that these things are really animated, you know, and unfortunately, I don't have a kind of a close-up of any of this stuff, but the palette, you know, did serve a very particular function that was very much about kind of like animating, you know, one material versus another in a very painterly way. So anyway, this is a show I did at Villa Capitaine in I don't remember, 2008. Should look at the screen. And it's a show of paintings and a show of photographs, my family's photographs. And everybody who was working at the studio was sort of asked to design a frame, any frame they wanted. And then it was just about the frames and the photographs. This is my mom and my daughter, and me and my brother and my dad at the bottom. That's my brother. That's me and my brother. That's me when I was in college at the University of Illinois. Thought I was going to be a doctor. Okay, so this show is interesting because it's sort of, it's kind of, it's almost like it's almost pornographic in a way. You know what I mean? It's you don't know what I mean, but let me explain. In the sense that it's like, you know, you have these kind of you have this form of intimacy, which is like, and by that I mean it's like that photograph will never mean what it means to me to anybody else in the world. And there's almost like running around naked in the bedroom with your wife or something. You know what I mean? It's like it's that type of information or something like that. And to sort of put it in kind of like, you know, juxtapose it to a kind of the history of very particular forms, and use that as a kind of a framing device is perverse. And that's sort of what I was trying to sort of look at. And when I say look at things, I mean, for me, looking at things is really important. And not just important to look at everything, and that's not what I mean. But I think a big part of what I do is I make things I want to see. You know, I want to see how they behave. And I don't have intentions that are clear. You know, I don't say this, I'm doing this because this is going to happen. It's not the management of a symbolic order. It's really kind of a bunch of propositions for things that I like, that I have, or that I have thoughts or considerations, or materials or forms that I want to kind of appropriately reuse and kind of juxtapose into other things. And that's what I'm interested in, one of the many things I'm interested in. This is a piece we did for a cruise ship. It's a rendering. It was a nightmare. I think They tried to sue me. Kind of nice though. This is a rendering of a collector who sold a bunch of my work. Didn't know me, but I'm still friends with him. This is a series of pavilions that we did for a retrospective in Dusseldorf. Oh, and these are the lights. So it's basically, and that's like a bunch of people that. This is an interesting show because it was like a retrospective of a bunch of a lot of stuff and some new things. Like the pavilions are sort of like these kind of focus points for the show, or things around them. And then we have these lamps. So there was some new works that were made for the exhibition too. And the lamps are all just people that worked with me. And I don't remember, there were about 10 or 12 of us all together. You remember that? It was, and so there was like there was work from the 80s through the end of the last, this is about 4 years ago. It's about 20 years worth of work. And then what we did is we made I'm a pilot. Also, I don't really fly anymore. It's kind of dangerous. But and so we made a flight simulator of the space of the show. In other words, we modeled the exhibition and kind of made like an environment so you could go and fly through the show. So you could sort of, and it was a real flight simulator. In other words, it wasn't like a toy. In order to like fly the plane, you had to know how to fly planes. Of course, only a couple of weird ex-Nazi pilots were there. So people would go there, it's like, hey, this doesn't do anything. Well, you got to fly the plane. But it was sort of interesting that you could. I was interested in like how you can kind of like. Retrospective is something that's about kind of honing in and at the same time kind of tracking through these different kind of periods of things that you make, and it's supposed to be really. And I thought, at the end of the day, what's probably most interesting about this for me is to make this stupid flight simulator, because I'm more interested in flying than really looking back at what I did. So this is a house that I made in Mexico that I live in now. Very simple. It's on a 1,700 square foot lot. It feels very spacious. This is a house I did in Puerto Rico for a collector, these Puerto Rican collectors, which are very good friends of mine. This is a show I did we're getting towards, I'm going to open it up to questions. It's already 6:35. So I'm just going to go through these real quick and let you look at some colors and things. This is actually interesting because this is the exhibition catalog for the museum show at the Irish Museum. Instead of printing a book, I made 9 tables, and all the text that was in the catalog actually is on the tables. So we took the budget for that and did this. Group of lamps. That's it. So if you have any questions, please ask.
The Ireland Museum of Modern Art, when was that exhibition? And is it still the permanent pieces there? Where is it in the museum?
It was kind of it doesn't say, I don't remember. It was probably 5 years ago, 2010, 4 years ago. Yeah, coming up on. And they don't. It was up for about. It was a typical kind of survey retrospective. It was up for maybe 4 or 5 months. I don't think they kept anything from the show. So. Okay. Nice, it was nice to go to Ireland. Very nice people. Yes?
When you do a house, how far do you go with the actual production of it? I mean, you design it, and then do you get a draftsman in to actually make the plans, or?
I function just like an architect. I mean, everything from site visits to overseeing the plans of the city, all that stuff. I have people, I have 3 architects who work for me now, so.
And then you do some of the woodwork up at yourself.
I don't touch anything. I hate that stuff. I know a lot about it. I mean, I used to do all that stuff, and I actually, I probably know more about making things than most people that make things that look like this. They're artists. But I don't, it's like, we have a lot of things going on. We have about 6 or 7 projects running at the same time. We have a, CNC machine at this, we have lasers, we have full shop, we have a couple of carpenters, a painter. But I'm in there, and I'm in there a lot. And it's a studio. It's my studio. It's different. It's different. When I say that, I think it's very different than, like, I think a lot of these things, like, these lamps you're looking at, most artists would shop them out. They would find somebody and, some kid would draw it for them, some kid would do it, and it would be in your studio. But this was made in the studio. And there are a lot of things a lot of places where I intervene in these things in terms of their production. And that's the only reason I have a studio that's complicated and has people in it. It's a pain in the ass to have. Because it would be much nicer and much easier to be a painter or somebody who works by themselves. But because of the nature of what I do, if I want to be in it, and that's what I mean by being in it, if I want to be able to actually edit the production and the process of what it is and how it's going to become what it is, you have to do it. So, yeah.
I'm curious about your sense of patternization, because it's really diverse, and how you evolved to using that, say, from your student days into what it is now, so collaborative and so collegiate.
I think it's just something you develop as you go. It's not really, I used to go out with this artist, Pay White, and she's really good with color and form and all that stuff. She's kind of one of those people who leave a bunch of trash around, and she organizes it in this funny way, and it always looks better than everybody else's. it's like, so, I think you pick that stuff up. You figure out how to make things. You figure out how color works. You sort of just do it. I don't think that I think that stuff's innate to only a certain degree, but then after a while, it's like, I think you work with things for 20 years, and after a while you get really facile at things that seem amazing, but they're not that amazing. You just do a lot. It's like shaving. Yeah. Which I don't do. Yeah.
How do you feel about permanency? Because some of your things are houses, fairly permanent, and other things aren't. Or like the DA installation, you're saying their shows were commissioned to be 9 months long. Is your floor still there? The DA?
No, that's gone. I mean, it's, some things are around for a long time, some things are around for a couple of weeks. I mean, I don't think that permanency is. I think it's just another factor in what it is. But I don't necessarily think that because something is permanent, it somehow has more value than something it isn't. I think they're just different conditions that make the work possible.
I have a similar question for the same thing. It's like the house that you did for the Mocha show. Did that stay a house?
Yeah, it was my house until I got divorced, and then my ex-wife ended up with it. So, that's it.
Well, that makes me wonder about this. Also, it seems like from the beginning, it sort of felt like you weren't into art as objects or objects that are art, and yet then there are these beautiful little glass things and lamps and things like that, and then there's this very conceptual thing going on, and it's interesting how they go back and forth.
Yeah, I think a visual artist's primary role is to screw with the problems of visuality. You know, color and form and all those things are like, like funny looking fish or something like that. It's like you look at them because they're funny looking, but it's not like, what's important about, what's specific about the fish is probably it's genetic, lineage. There's a lot of fish that are related to other fish that look nothing like it. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a question. It's not really like, I always see color and form and all these things that they kind of play they operate with a lot of conflict of interest, and they're kind of like the physiognomy of things, but there's a whole other sort of set of problems that don't reside on what something looks like, whatever. I happen to like things that look like the things I make. That's probably why I make them. But I would say that's one, like this, that I like what those things look like is important, but it's just one thing. Yeah.
What drew you or draws you to lamps as objects? It seems like you've done a series of magnificent lamps or lights.
I started making lamps because we could kind of make them quickly, and they were very elemental. I mean, it's like basically, it's like you turn the light off, there's nothing, you turn the light on, and there's a lamp. And only that, there's the quality of the lamp. So in terms of a kind of a proposition for visuality, it's a kind of complete circle. And lamps are the only things that kind of light themselves. And if you have them in a room with nothing else, it's sort of like, and I just like making them. When you're making lamps, it's just like making drawings, or it's just about, like, yesterday when we were at the gallery and we turned the lights off, and you realize that the lamp actually kind of lights the whole room, and it actually starts to draw and it does things. I'm interested in that. I'm interested in what the quality of the light turns the quality of the lamp into. So, yes.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your move from producing objects at Art Center to kind of your interest in participatory experiences and kind of the experiential, immersive environments, and perhaps, some of your influences, or do you feel that the art world was changing in the late 90s? Just hoping you could talk a little more about that.
I went to school in the 80s when it was like, the kind of modus operandi for theory in art schools was a bunch of communists, or leftover, kind of like these kind of half-dead communist kind of theories and things like that. It really wasn't interesting. It was, historically it was very interesting in terms of what those traditions are and how they were made explicit to us. That's really useful. I think Marx is fantastic. So it's a different set of problems. But I think in the 80s, anybody who wasn't brain dead in the 80s probably realized that they couldn't really make work like people had been making in the 70s and the 80s, where there were too many contradictions, there were too many problems, or you couldn't be Barbara Curator and pretend to kind of make explicit, like, how you were being manipulated by the media, and then turn around and give it to Mary Boone and sell it for $500,000. There's so many contradictions that it just doesn't work. And I really don't like work that's didactic, that basically instructs you politically, in this way that you already know. Everybody knows they're being manipulated, but nobody cares because they don't live in Africa and they're not catching Ebola. We're pretty comfy here. So at the end of the day, like a political sphere in this country is very complicated. That's the reason we end up with the people we end up with. But in art schools, it's even worse because to kind of make art a political platform is even more pathetic. So I never really I wanted to make work that really made a very clear kind of break from issues that I had sort of been sort of force-fed in art school. And I wanted to know what I wanted to do. I wanted to try to kind of, really kind of find what was interesting to me, how I could sort of work with it, how I could turn that into something that I could do for a while, I could investigate, what were the things, and And when I got out of school, I just became more interested in architecture than I was in like, directly referring to paintings in particular, or works of a certain period or whatever. It was just, it was LA at the end of the 80s. I mean, you could buy a Schindler house for $50,000, $100,000 was a big piece of crap. It was Silver Lake and Echo Park. It was dangerous to live there, and it was full of these things. And then I realized, the most pertinent form of aesthetic history that the city has is its architecture. It's not its art. It's not painting. It has really strong, interesting tradition of painting, but compared to the amount of examples of modern architecture that run not just from the 50s on, but from the 20s and teens is enormous and incredible. Compared to like a tradition, a visual art tradition, which is you have a lot of people. There's a lot of stuff from the beginning of the period, the century on, but it's like in 1920 nobody was making Monterey or California, but they were making the same culture that Corbusier was, and it was happening here with the specifics of living in Southern California. And then I thought, this is interesting. This is like going to the museum for me. This is what I felt like when I was a kid. And I would go to the Art Institute and I would get really excited about, what about the Pollock or the de Kooning, and you know what I mean? It's like this stuff has density. This is something that in the future this city has produced that's actually going to be worth culturally a lot. So as a result of it, I just started to become more and more interested in it. And I started to devise what I did, around and with the problems of an artist using architecture as a point of departure for being a sculptor. So, yeah.
There's such a force of color in your work, and you live in Merida now, right? And I was wondering if that environment had a really strong influence on you in the objects you chose or whatever, in your conceptualization, and if that also linked the memory to Cuba.
I mean, I think the heat links the memory to Cuba more than anything else. The humidity. No, it was. I like Latin culture. I grew up in it. I grew up with. I grew up in Chicago and in the suburbs of Chicago as a kid, around Americans, and but we were always. All my friends were Cuban until I went to college, and so it's like But it's like it's not like I didn't grow up in Miami, where there are crazy people there, and so we generally the Cubans who kind of immigrated to the Midwest, they assimilated very deeply, and even though the parents were barely spoke English, and we ate Cuban food every night, the kids were American pretty quickly. So but I like Merida not so much as a city, but I like the region. I think it's a really beautiful and strange area, and it's Mayan, and the Mayans are weird, and it's still there. You go into these little towns, and there have been people living there for 3,000 or 4,000 years, and they're kind of still there. And it's like it feels like it just felt to me like it was like the closest you could go to a place that felt really far away. So. Yes?
I'm curious about the maintenance of the houses. Do you continue to produce tiles for the houses as they age?
It's funny because this project that we didn't get to see was called Teco, which is kind of the last kind of big project that I did. It's very large, and the patrons really do see it as an artwork. So they actually have somebody on staff who basically perpetually restores this thing because it's always falling apart. Making a house in the middle of the jungle is like owning a boat, The thing's always dying on you. So it's there. But no, I don't really, I think, it's a house. It's like I do things for exhibitions, and anything and everything can be an exhibition. So it's not so much like, I think the house I did for Mocha changed dramatically as I lived in it. And the house in Puerto Rico changed dramatically too. So Generally, people who ask me to make a house for them, they're always calling me about certain things, like, I need to change the door, it kind of rotted, can I use this material? So, yeah, sure, whatever it works. But you can't control that stuff, so anyway.
I think we're out of time, but Jorge, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.